to join us for the first of what we hope will be a series of educational presentations on the new climate laws that will be coming down to all of us in New York State. We will have more presentations in the future. This is just the first of we hope to be many. There are many experts across New York State who want to talk to all of us to help us understand this enormous plan that has been issued and is so voluminous and hard to get through, but they have gone through it and they can help us understand the pros and cons of the plans. Our main message tonight is read the fine print. On the surface, a lot of what we see advertised about the climate laws seems really great. Like, who wouldn't want clean air and clean water? But the way these, there's a super great marketing team out there to present all the rosy aspects and just completely ignoring things that most of us would not be very happy about. I was someone, until a few years ago, who was like that. I just thought, oh, it's green, yeah, vote yes. Until a friend of mine whispered in my ear, did you know that cobalt is used in the car batteries, and cobalt is mined by slave labor in the Congo. And in addition to that, there are over 40,000 children who are forced into slavery because they're small and they can get into these tiny holes. The runoff from the cobalt is ruining farmland, it's causing birth defects, and it's just a horrendous, catastrophic environmental problem. It was from that moment on when I Googled and found out that this was true that I thought, oh no, what have I been supporting? What else don't I know? And I started digging. And the more I dug into the plan for New York State, the more concerned I became. So where did it all begin? So in 2019, Governor Cuomo signed into law something called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. It's also known as the Climate Act. Immediately thereafter, a 22-member advisory council was formed to develop guidelines for local officials to use in order to implement the law and make sure that all of us are abiding by the new law. That council is called the Climate Action Council, the CAC, and they developed something called the CAC Scoping Plan. In their document, it clearly states one of their main strategies for changing local laws and codes is to use each town and villages and cities local climate smart community task force to implement these changes, along with consultants who are NGOs ready to come and assist to make sure that we are all in lockstep. So that's how we got to where we are now. And sorry, I just changed my notes here. So the plan actually was finalized after 2.5 years in December of 2019. 3 of the 22 members, though, said no. Those 3 members happen to be the highest credentialed and most experienced professionals in energy on the council. Their names are Donna DeCarolis. She is the president of National Fuel Gas Company, representing 1.6 million natural gas customers in Western New York. Gavin Donahue, another member, also dissented, president and chief executive officer of the Independent Power Producers of New York, and Dennis Elsenbeck, an attorney and expert in energy and sustainability. So you can find their formal written statements that explains exactly why they don't agree with the plan. They have publicly stated that they need us to help them modify this plan So that is one of the reasons why we're having this meeting and having this series of meetings, because if we don't know what the particulars are, we're just going to end up living under tyranny. Okay, so there is a sheet on the handout at the tables in the back that list the links to these 3 statements that are important for every single one of us to know, because they lay out a very clear, succinct, researched, hard fact reason for why it shouldn't move forward. Okay, so tonight's main speaker, Bill Overbaugh, the executive director of the New York State Propane Association, is an expert on this topic, and he will provide us with an introduction to the changes that we will be expected to make and how we will all be affected. To wrap up the evening, Alistair Moraz, an expert in smart meters, will share for the last few minutes how this fits into the big picture. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Bill Overbaugh for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. So, as you just heard, I'm here to talk to you today about the CLCPA, and in particular, the scoping plan that the Climate Action Council has put together. So this is a massive 440-page document that will impact every part of your lives. And it's really important that you're here tonight, whether you believe everything I have to tell you or you think everything I say is hogwash. It's important to understand what's in this document, because it is the guiding policy document for New York State for the next 30 years. The scoping plan will impact every sector of our economy. And I'm going to run through some of these and talk about some of the changes that they're going to be rolling out. So the first one I want to talk about is transportation. You'll see some dates here that it's interesting, because the scoping plan is a recommendation, a list of recommendations for the government. It needs to be backed up then by legislation, regulation, and mandates. And so the dates that you see in these recommendations don't always line up with some of the legislature. So I'll try to be clear about that. In terms of the transportation sector, they intend to change everything about how we drive our vehicles. Every gas or diesel engine that you can think of will be transformed over to an electric option. So this is already passed. This is law in New York State. Starting in 2030, you will no longer be allowed to buy a fossil-fueled car. You will have to buy an electric car. Starting in 2045, this is where the dates are a little different from the plan. In 2045, medium and heavy-duty vehicles. But they don't just intend on going after the vehicles we drive on the streets. We're talking about farmers' tractors, tractor trailers, skid steers, loaders, lawnmowers, weed eaters, boats, motorcycles. Every type of engine you can think of will be electrified under this plan. In terms of our homes, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot an important point. It's not only just the motors that they're going after, they also want to change how we actually use that, how we transport ourselves. So the idea is to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 50%. So right now, if we put 20,000 miles on our vehicles, they want us to put 10. So how do you do that, right? Well, it means more biking, more walking, and more public transportation, which is great if you live in New York City, where public transportation is excellent. But out here in Hudson, New York, that's not reality. And so to make it reality, they want to also see us leave our beautiful homes in the countryside and become a lot more urbanized. So once we buy our homes in the cities, those homes themselves are going to look very, very different. All of our homes will be heated with electricity. Our stoves will be electric, our water heaters, that gas fireplace that you installed a couple of years ago in the living room. They haven't come out to say the gas grill on your deck, but it's propane, that's a fossil fuel. And so this begins, again, different dates here. There's a bill pending right now called the All Electric Building Act. If that gets voted into effect this legislative season, then starting December 31st of 2023, that's this year, buildings less than 7 stories will have to be all electric. And July 1st, 2027, buildings greater than 7 stories. Now that's for new construction. And if any of you recall the debate that we've been having about gas stoves recently, you may have heard President Biden and even Governor Hochul came out and said, no, we're not after your gas stoves. No one's going to tear them out of your homes. Well, that's not entirely true. The Climate Action Plan, the Scoping Plan, first talks about new construction, but in time they plan to roll this out to all homes. So starting around 2030 or so, existing homes, when your fossil fuel appliance goes bad, it will have to be replaced with an electric appliance. So what does it look like to heat our homes with electric? Well, the first idea is, as you may recall, back in the 80s, we would put those electric baseboard heaters in. And the next year, after we looked at our energy bills, we tore them all out. I've taken them out of 2 homes myself, and I'm only 46. But really what they're looking at is an air source heat pump. So it's kind of like that air conditioner on the wall. If you flip it around the other side, it's going to blow warm air inside the house. But they're more slick than that. You can do it with controls on the thermostat and that type of thing. They're actually kind of cool technology, and they provide really great cooling in the summer. They provide a little bit of heat in the spring and in the fall, and they provide nothing when it's below 0 degrees. So my biggest concern with the building sector portion of this is, as we're forced to put in electric heat pumps, as air source heat pumps, they just don't work in cold climates. Starting at around 30 degrees, the efficiency starts to plummet, and at 0 degrees, it violates the laws of thermodynamics to make these things work. I've spoken with people who have said, but you're not aware of these new high-efficiency heat pumps that they have out there. They've got cold climate heat pumps, but it's not reality.
They've never worked.
That's right.
In the industry for 30 years, they've never ever worked.
And
the only reason they might be working now is because the electric heat element they put into the heat exchanger.
Exactly. And the problem is when you install one, and the company I used to run before this position, we installed several, and it's very important we always encourage the customer to have a fossil fuel backup system. It can reduce your fossil fuel use. So that's an important point. Myself, and in fact my association, the New York Propane Gas Association, we're not advocating for doing nothing. We in fact think that the greenhouse gas emission goals of the climate action, of the CLCPA, the Climate Act, are achievable with realistic solutions that we can implement today. But the scoping plan that the Climate Action Council has put together is going to be a disaster for us. So all of these plans are supported by the changes in the electric sector. So here, they plan to shut down all of our fossil fuel power plants. They've already shut down all of our coal power plants. And the replacement for all of that is wind and solar. Now, aside from the issues that we just raised about where the minerals come from for wind and solar, set that aside. I think that wind and solar can be a good mixture of our energy supply, but I don't think it can be all of it. This is a picture of where we get our power from. I took this, February 8th, supposedly at 1:45 a.m. I don't know where that came from because I was asleep, I promise. But what it shows is that we generate about 40% of our power from fossil fuels. That is a little bit different upstate versus downstate. So upstate is almost entirely green. There's a lot of hydro and a lot of nuclear. Downstate, there's a lot more natural gas and fossil fuels. And I believe this area that we are right now has a lot of fossil fuel-based power, very expensive power, in fact. And just as an aside, I took this picture about a year ago. And it's interesting to see, if I stop popping up things, you can see there's very little difference after a year. Here we are talking about dramatic changes to our grid, and after a year, we've made no changes at all. So what's the problem with this? And I don't typically like to read my slides, but our reliability margins are thinning to concerning levels beginning in 2023. That was a statement that was put in a grid reliability report released by the New York State ISO, the Independent System Operator. And that's the organization that runs our grid. Reducing reliability margins thinning to concerning levels beginning in 2023. So the condition of our grid is degrading at the very time that we are going to increase the demand on it by 400 to 450% and take away many of the sources of power that we're using right now. This is a picture, of course, from Texas in 2020, where the grid collapsed, 700 people dead. And you don't have to look that far away. This is Buffalo, New York, over Christmas time, 40 people dead. What's going to happen when all of those homes of those people who didn't die are now running on electricity on a grid that collapses, that can't be brought up because they can't access the power lines because of all the snow? That is a situation that's a reality in upstate New York. Here's a chart that shows the the demand on the power grid during a typical day in New England. So you can see there's a base load of about 10 gigawatts. And then when we all wake up, we get out of bed and we start using power, that'll increase to about 15 gigawatts. And there will be a spike when we all come home from work at the end of the day, cook our meals, and watch TV. That power is supplied by three different kind of general categories. There's the base load power plants, the intermediate, and the peaking power plants. So that base load, coal-fired power plants, we've already closed all those down. Nuclear, hydroelectric. In the intermediate load, some of the hydroelectric can be intermediate. Biogas and biomass, this is typically burning garbage. And the peak load, natural gas and oil-fired. After the CLCPA goes into effect, we will have eliminated the coal, half of our intermediate load sources, and all of our peak load sources. This chart is what they call a duck curve. I'm going to kind of quickly get through this because I know we don't have an enormous amount of time. But this is the supply curve for solar panels in a typical, actually this was taken in 2020 in California in the springtime. So what happens is, the problem here is, if you can recall the slide I just showed with the demand curve and the supply curve don't look very much like each other. And as we all know, with electricity, when you flip a switch and turn on a light, there's a power plant that generates those electrons at that moment. That doesn't work when you're using solar panels. It doesn't work when you're using wind. There's our chart there. So this is why the New York State ISO has said that we have to have quick start power options. They are essential to a reliable grid, and we're removing them. The solution of the scoping plan is to put in battery storage. Sounds like a great idea, except that technology doesn't exist. At least not on the scale that's needed to supply all of New York State. I think the idea behind that is that each one of us should be putting in battery storage in our homes. And I actually looked into that. What does that look like, right? So I found a Tesla Powerwall using the technology they use in their cars, and you mount it in your basement and it feeds your house. So one of these units will provide power for a typical home for about 3 days. Well, okay, hopefully the grid comes up in 3 days, because if it doesn't, then you still need that grid to recharge the batteries, but 3 days. What's the cost for that? Well, the unit is $12,000 plus installation. So in my house, I have a propane generator that will get me probably a week, and then my propane company can come and fill it and give me another week. And I paid $5,000 for that. Industry. The simplicity of this slide really belies what the impact is going to be to industry because there's so much crossover from other sectors with industry. When I came in here, I drove through Selkirk and I saw a Corning plant. I saw a variety of different industrial plants there. And what I noticed is there were no homes next to them. So if we are all force-couraged, if that's a word, to move into the cities, then all those industrial plants are also going to have to move into the cities. And then I think about the transportation needs to supply an industrial plant like that, the tractor trailers that bring products in, the equipment they use there to perform whatever processes they have. Agriculture. So obviously here they want to reduce the fossil fuel use in our tractors and in the equipment that we use. If any of you are farmers here, you're going to be driving electric tractors. Your chicken barns are going to be heated with electric. Figure that one out. And I don't know how to say this in nice company, but they want our cows to stop gassing. So the idea behind that is feed management, which I think is kind of a neat idea. But what's interesting about that is flatulence from cows is part of the natural carbon cycle. They eat the grass that grew this season. And so it's part of the natural carbon cycle. We're not pulling carbon molecules from deep underground, so why is this part of our plan? Waste. So nothing surprising here. They want us all to reduce, reuse, and recycle. I think it's probably something we can generally get behind on here. There's nothing earth-shattering about their plan for waste.
I didn't make that stuff.
And how is it all going to be paid for? Obviously, they're going to have to levy taxes. The taxes that they have proposed, there's a bill out right now, a carbon tax bill, and it calls for $35 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalency, increasing by $15 every year to $185. What does that mean? What it means is, and I did the math for propane, I haven't done it for other fuels, and I apologize for that, but for propane, it means 20 cents per gallon, increasing by 9 cents every year to $1.17 after about 13 years. Natural gas is going to be a little bit less than that. Fuel oil, kerosene, gasoline, and diesel are going to be quite a bit chunk more than that.
What about wood?
So wood is a really interesting thing. So the Climate Action Council doesn't really address wood a lot. I think because they see, again, it's part of the natural carbon cycle. But other forces in Albany are very much against the particulate matter emissions, which don't so much impact the greenhouse gases, but there's been a lot of movements lately. You may have, I don't know in your communities, but where I live, they've outlawed outdoor wood boilers and things like that. All of our stoves were converted in 2020. Now new stoves have to have a catalytic converter in them, and primary, secondary, tertiary combustion to reduce the emissions levels. So wood is not excluded in this report, but it's also not, they're not wrapping their arms around it. Same for nuclear. There we go. So the carbon taxes, we did an analysis of the carbon taxes, and what we found that over a 10-year cycle, this will add about $22,000 of expenses to all of our home budgets. And that's just the first iteration. In fact, I didn't mention Germany has gone through this same transition over the past 15 to 20 years. They now have 120% of their electricity demand available in wind and solar. Good for them. Their electricity prices have risen by 300 to 400%. And now that the war in the Ukraine is happening, they're being forced to put coal power plants back into service. You can't make it up.
They're cutting down the ancient forest.
Yes. So, bottom line is it worth it? We are here in the Sportsman's Club where people are very nature-minded, and you know what? There's a little part of, even me, this little part that says, if the world really was coming to an end, I'd be willing to do quite a lot to prevent it. But consider this. New York is responsible for 0.4% of the carbon emissions of the world. Even if these plans work, it's not going to amount to a hill of beans in terms of climate change. So, I want to leave you with this. Your voice matters. It is so important. Again, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, you need to become educated about this because it is going to change your lives. And you need to learn about it, you need to communicate it with your legislators, and make sure that they know how you feel. You can do that through our website, smarternyenergy.org. It's on some of your handouts. And if you want to see the other side of the debate, New York Renews is the organization that did most of the work to push for this legislation. You can read about it on their website. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alistair. Hopefully I gave you enough time.
Hello, everybody. Check. My name is Alistair Mraz. Grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania. My grandfather took me to lots of rod and gun clubs as a kid, so I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you. And I just want to preface my main topic by stating that I think we can all agree that we don't want to see mountaintop removal for coal extraction or deal with toxic well water from fracking here in the community. So there's a balanced solution. We can find that. And my topic today is a bit about, it's called power disaggregation or non-intrusive load monitoring and in relation to smart meters. So it's very simple, really quick. I have here the electrical signal from 3 different common appliances. This is a toaster, this is an incandescent bulb, and a compact fluorescent light. So the main thing is each one is distinct, unique, and every appliance has its own unique signature.
Can you put it up?
Uh,
I can hold it if you want, Alistair.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so it used to be that the electric companies or utility companies would send someone to your house, get a meter reading, subtract last month's reading, and they would say, this is your bill. Now we have smart meters. I've measured one that pulsed information out every 15 seconds. And so with that, you can get the electrical signature of an entire house. So here's a 60-minute time period, the kilowatts that are used for the whole home. Now, since 1983, PhD students in MIT have been trying to figure out how to get these signals from here to be able to say, they call it disaggregating the power. They're trying to say, at this time, some appliance went on and that was a refrigerator. Well now, in the year 2023, we have machine learning algorithms, and so, flip that over. What you see is something like this. You can see this is a blender, this is the fan heater, stove burner, oven. All of this can now be parsed out from the home's electrical signature with technology we have. Now, in Britain, on October 1st, the government stated that they will be, against what they said in 2016, they will be collecting, storing, and processing all smart meter data from the whole country. So here in New York State, we have a bill in the Senate, S404, I have some copies of it in the back, that would make it so that electric companies, utility companies in general, have to give the option to opt out of a smart meter. So I'd say inquire with your utility company what data they're collecting, how much they're collecting, what they're doing with it, support S404, and that's all I have.